before we move, can we review and adopt the agenda? Can any honorable member move that we adopt? Thank you, colleagues. It's moved and seconded. Mrs. Bensouda, welcome back to this investigation. This is just a continuation, so I'm sure you've been here for the past few days. There is no need to go over the statements and introductions. At this point in time, I would just ask the council to take the proper steps so that we can progress in this investigation. Council, can you take over, please?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Good morning, Ms. Bensouda. And welcome back to the National Assembly. I'm sure you're well aware, but I'm obliged to remind you that you are still under oath. Okay, so may we begin? Ms. Bensouda. I would wish for us to move on from where we left off on the last adjourned date and move on to a meeting that your inaugural meeting with the Attorney General and the commissioners. I believe you had hinted on it in your previous testimony, and several witnesses have also spoken to the issue. Can you confirm that such a meeting was held?
Inaugural meeting with?
It would have been at the Ministry of Justice with the Attorney General, the Secretary General, and the commissioners, as well as the first secretary to the commission.
The Solicitor General?
Yes, the Solicitor, my apologies. Solicitor General, the Minister of Justice, the commissioners, the first secretary, and yourself.
Yes.
In that meeting, the government, through the Minister of Justice, had brought to your notice its efforts to preserve some of the assets that were indicated in several reports. Isn't that so?
I can't remember the details.
Okay. But in any case, whether in that meeting or subsequently, you got wind of the fact that, or rather you were briefed by the Ministry of Justice that a suit was filed and an order was obtained preserving certain assets.
Yes, I was aware of that. This inaugural meeting you're talking about, if I recollect, was a meeting after the whole team was appointed. That's the commissioners were identified. I'm not sure whether it was before they were sworn in or after. But when I met with the Attorney General, we discussed that the case was pending. The High Court case was pending, and an order had been obtained. I said so in my evidence.
Yes, you did. I would like us to spend a bit of time on one of the orders. The first order, the order of the 22nd day of May 2017, Honorable Chair, referenced as MOJ 5A. I would ask the Secretariat to furnish the witness with both MOJ 5A and a subsequent MOJ 5C, which is an order of the 21st day of July 2017. Both orders given under the hand of the Honorable Miss Justice Amina Saho Sise. I'll just give you a second to peruse both documents before I engage.
I've seen this before. You may proceed.
MOJ 5A and MOJ 5C. Great. So if you could give us a rundown of MOJ 5A, you need not read any specifics, but just to give us a gist of what MOJ 5A attempts to do.
MOJ 5A is an order by the High Court in the case brought by the Attorney General against Alhaji Yahya AJJ JAMMEH, former president, and was made on the 22nd day of May 2017. The order on its face is made pursuant to an application that was made by the Attorney General, and the court references the application and indicates that it is satisfied that there are reasonable grounds for granting the application, and as a result made 15 orders which are set out in MOJ 5A. And these include the granting of an interim injunction against the former president and his agents, associates, and servants, meaning employees, from disposing of or dealing with all movable and immovable properties held by him or in his possession or control of his family members, associates, and agents. And these are listed as an annexure. Then Order 2 Order 2 grants control over all movable and immovable properties that are listed in the attachment, granted to the Registrar General. Order 3 granted an interim injunction against the former president from dealing with all livestock and animals.
Perhaps let me save you the trouble of going through all the paragraphs.
Yeah.
But essentially, several stakeholders were identified and assets bestowed upon them?
Not bestowed, they were granted custody, interim custody of those assets pending the determination of the suit that was brought by the Attorney General.
Okay, so each of these institutions or persons was responsible, of course, maybe the court or the applicant looked at their mandates, their office mandates, be it an institution or a personnel. Wouldn't you agree?
Sorry, let me just correct. It was not
Sure.
something I said. It was not pending the determination of the suit, but MOJ 5A granted it for a period of 180 days, and MOJ 5C
Extended it for another 180 days.
yes, another 180 days. So this order shall subsist for a period of 180 days. But MOJ 5C is with regard to a different set of property. This was with regard to accounts and companies. So that's also 180 days. So then the term granted does not run concurrently. One starts 22nd day of May, the other one starts 21st day of July. It seems, at least from my reading of it. Yes.
Okay, I would like you to enlighten the committee on the essence of the orders.
Well, my understanding of these orders, of course, these are orders obtained by the Attorney General, but my understanding of them was that all identified properties, movable and immovable, belonging to JAMMEH, there was a restraining order against him dealing with any of the properties that are listed, which means he had no right of access to them, and control of those assets were being temporarily placed in the custody of identified persons, offices, institutions, and a receiver in the interim for 180 days.
Thank you. Indeed, when the committee had the pleasure of questioning the former Attorney General, he mentioned a similar rationale. However, he went further to state that at the time there was it was somewhat chaotic, and assets were being dissipated, assets were being consumed, and there was a need to put some order, hence the need to obtain this preservatory order. Now, of course, most of the assets, if not all, contained in both orders would subsequently be the subject matter of the JANNEH Commission. Am I right in making that statement?
Yes.
And by the time the JANNEH Commission had commenced, I would also be right in saying the assets were being preserved through a court order.
The JANNEH Commission's terms of reference were to investigate the acquisition of the assets. They were investigating the acquisition of assets. So by the time it commenced, this court order was in place. Yes.
Okay. Well, it's a piece of evidence that we'll come back to a lot today. So I would keep it close, and we move on to other issues. But most of the issues we'll touch on this order. Perhaps now we can speak about commencement. You did mention in your last in the last adjourn date that you commenced work on the 17th, though you were given your appointment letter on the 12th of July 2017. You commenced on the 17th.
Yes.
If you could pick it up from there, what the committee is interested in is to know what was entailed in setting up of the commission, the roles, the organogram, and such administrative matters.
Mm. I had my engagement letter, which set out role, what my role was in the commission as lead counsel to the commission. I have provided that engagement letter. So when first, of course, we had to have a location from which to operate. And once that was identified and my space was assigned, I started as you will note from the terms of reference of the commission, the TOR, there were reports that were referred to in connection with the institutions that were to be the subject matter of investigations. So I started off writing to many of those institutions, asking for reports that they may have. I also requested that the police investigators be assigned. I also asked the Attorney General to provide support counsel. So basically, apart from having meetings with the commissioners concerning the setting up of the secretariat and other matters, I presume, my role, frankly, was to get the investigation going. That was my first role. So getting all the investigators in place and getting all the reports also, so that I could review them and map a way forward. So that is what I did. So once I received the reports, and the police had done some investigations earlier on some of the subject matters for investigation, and the police, the police investigators who were responsible were assigned, and some of them came with their files. So we just picked up from where the police stopped. We reviewed the files, and I came up with a plan of how to approach the investigation, complete the investigation, and present the results of the investigation to the commissioners. So basically, that's how I started. Obviously, there was in terms of the operations of the commission, the commissioners and the secretariat were separate from my office. I had counsel's office. And the investigators also had their own offices, and they worked as investigators. So the results of all investigations were submitted to me. I reviewed them. And so that's how we operated. So the secretariat had their own structure and had their own team. I had my team, and the investigators were also separate. So I don't know whether that helped you in what you're trying to find out.
Certainly. However, would like to go back to understand, at least from your perspective, the structure of the commission. When I say structure, I mean in terms of the organogram of the commission. How did you see the different parts, the different units?
The commission did not have an organogram as such because it's an ad hoc body. So, but it had the way it operated, it was organized. So there was no structure. There were three independent, if I may describe it in that way, functions that needed to be carried out. So you had the commission and the commissioners and their team, and obviously the commissioners were responsible for sitting, receiving evidence, reviewing that evidence. And so the commissioners were one part of the functions that were supposed to be carried out. Then you had the secretariat that was responsible for all administrative matters, responsible for witnesses, making sure that witnesses appeared, and taking care of the needs of the commission. So their function was mostly administrative. Of course, their functions are set out in the Act. In the Commission of Inquiry Act sets out the role of the Secretariat. But in addition, the Secretariat was responsible for the needs of the Commission. I am independent counsel. I'm not part of the Commission, or I wasn't part of the Commission. I acted as counsel, lead counsel, appointed by the Attorney General to assist the Commission, and I had my own independent office. My functions were somewhat independent. I worked with the investigators. I reviewed the evidence that was provided, and I presented the evidence to the commissioners. So there was a distinction definitely between the commissioners and the investigators, although we had some meetings and the commissioners were free to call the investigators and look at their files, but I reviewed the investigators. The investigators were also independent of me, of my office. They will investigate and submit the outcome of their investigations to me. The reason, of course, being that I had to review and make sure that the evidence that was being presented to the commissioners met the required standard. And basically, that was my role. So you had the commissioners and the commissioner's office, you had the secretariat, you had counsel's office, and then you had the investigators. But one can say that the secretariat was part and parcel of the commission, basically because the secretariat worked with the commission. So three distinct functions, and we were organized as independent functions, kind of.
Just a bit of ambiguity in the tail end of your evidence with regards to the investigation team. I would like to clarify that your evidence is that there were three independent units: the commissioners, secretariat, and council. But you also mentioned that the investigation team was independent of you, which would make it a fourth independent unit, four components to the structure of the commission.
No, there were three because the secretariat was not independent of the commissioners. That's why I said the secretariat formed part of the commission. They were the support to the commission. So they worked with the commission would give their instructions to the secretariat. So the secretariat was part of the commission.
Okay, so the three components are the commission, that would include the commissioners and the secretariat.
And the secretariat.
And then you would have council.
Yes.
And then you would have the investigation team.
Yes.
Okay. If I would ask that RS 81 be given to the witness. 81. Yes, RS 81. RS 81, Ms. Bensouda, is a document that was, perhaps if you could turn off your mic to avoid interference. Thank you. RS 81, Ms. Bensouda, is an attempt by the second secretary, Mr. Ramatullah Sarr, to describe the relationship between within the commission. I would ask that you look at it and perhaps comment on the accuracy of that organogram.
Firstly, as I said, the commission was not an establishment, and therefore I don't think an organogram can be said to be an appropriate tool to describe its functional operations. So the commission was an ad hoc committee, and it had a time span, and in fact it's functus. There is no commission of inquiry. As soon as it handed its report, it became functus. So it was a mechanism. So how was it organized? If I look at what is referred to here as the organogram, even if, as I said, it's accepted that an organogram is appropriate, there was no hierarchical relationship between the different units. There was no hierarchical. So it's not a question of someone reporting to the other. Perhaps it would be only relevant in terms of the way the commissioners operated. So there is no distinction between the chairman of the commission and the commissioners. These are my comments. The commissioners and the chairman are one. The commissioner should not be in a different box from the chairman. And the chairman, he was the one who represented them in terms of signing administrative documents. But when it comes to orders, they all had to sign. So the commissioners and the chairman, I would say, is one function. Lead counsel does not, this is not hierarchical. As I said, lead counsel was independent, and we don't report to the commission. We don't report. We present evidence. We are entirely independent. The commission can ask us for advice. It can ask us to look at an issue. But we don't report to the commission. The secretariat is different. There can be a structure for the secretariat because you have the secretary, but I don't see the secretary here. I just see chairman and then assistant secretary and the different units. But obviously the secretary is missing, and there was never any time when the commission did not have a secretary. So it's the secretary that really is the administrative head, and it's the secretary that reports to the commission, not only to the chairman. So so there's a secretary, then assistant secretaries. I think there was more than one, and then you had this unit. So if perhaps that can be represented by an organogram. What also missing is the investigators. The investigators are not here. The investigators are police investigators. They were provided by the Inspector General of Police, and they were entirely independent in their investigations, although they worked with me, and I did not direct them. They provided their reports. I reviewed their reports, and if there was anything that was missing in terms of what the report was supposed to serve, I would draw their attention as to what was missing, and I'll make suggestions as to what they can do. But as you know, investigators are always independent. They were not subject to my direction. But to summarize, the organogram is inappropriate because it does not really understand the functional dynamics of a commission of inquiry. And using it as a tool to explain what was going on is inappropriate. And in any event, even if one were to accept it, it would only be relevant to the commission and the relationship between the commissioners and the secretariat. That had a structure, perhaps, but the rest, with reference to myself and the investigators, the organogram is entirely inappropriate.
Okay, that's understood. From your testimony, there are three independent components, and perhaps within those components, especially for the secretariat, there could be a hierarchy.
Yes.
But as they relate to each other, it is only, from your testimony, of course, it is only the secretariat that reports to the commissioners.
Yes.
And of course, the hierarchy within the secretariat. Now, the legal team also had a hierarchy. Of course, you were the lead counsel. There should have been other counsel in your team, correct?
Yes.
All right. We've received.
But let me just say that in my team there was no hierarchy. I was lead counsel. I assigned work. And it was a functional relationship. It was not a structured one, where I kind of direct. The commissions of inquiry are not establishments. They are not establishments. They are not departments. They are mechanisms. So as a mechanism that is used as a tool by the executive to carry out a certain investigation. So how that mechanism is organized is dynamic, it's functional, but it's not structured. So even as my team, I had a team I worked with, but there was no structure. So as, for instance, I didn't have an assistant lead counsel. I was lead counsel and the rest were counsel. There was no structure whatsoever. Investigators also did not have any structure. We didn't have a lead investigator. They were in a group of investigators, and they were assigned different portfolios, and which they investigated and submitted. Each of them worked independently. Yes.
Please enlighten us. Usually I would say enlighten the committee, but this time I would say enlighten us on how a mechanism differs from an establishment.
I think that's an important question. An establishment is an organization or an institution that is structured, and in the context of government, an establishment is set up either by statute as a permanent body, or it's set up generally within the budget process. But most government institutions obviously are set up by statute, and that statute will define their objective and will set out an organizational structure for their operation, whether they have a board they report to, whether they have a head who directs their affairs, and what that head is called, and how that organization has committees, has other bodies. So it's structured in an organizational framework. So establishments always have a framework, an organizational framework, and they must be, in the context of government, they must be set up by law. So in our own system, it's the government, the president can actually, by the constitution, set up departments. But those departments must be properly established, and they must be budgeted.
Please enlighten us on what properly established would entail.
Well, they would have to have either a law or an executive, well, in recent terms, even an executive directive. But even if the president wants to set up a department, it has to go through a process, a legal process. It may have to come to Parliament. Parliament would have to pass legislation setting it up properly. and so forth. So there is a process through which departments can be set up, and so there's hardly, I can't think offhand of any establishment that is set up without legislation or some legislative process. Yes.
Okay, that's a clear picture of what an establishment is. Perhaps we can move on to make the contrast with a mechanism.
Well, okay. Now, if you look at the Constitution in terms of the Commission of Inquiry, which is a good example of what a mechanism is, the Constitution provides that the President may issue, I don't know whether we have a copy. Volume 1. If you have a copy, yes, Section 200 of the Commission of Inquiry Act.
Do you have a copy of the Commission of Inquiry Act, or
Yes, I
should
do.
we find?
I have that one. If you look at Section 2.1 of the Commission of Inquiry Act, which is more or less using this well, and Section 200 of the Constitution.
Perhaps, Ms. Bensouda, if we can just hold off a bit so that all the members are on the same page. The Constitution and the Commission of Inquiry Act.
Council, we are okay. Go on, proceed.
Please proceed.
If you look at the language, because the Constitution overrides the Commission of Inquiry, I'll just focus on the Constitution. It's the same language anyway. Section 200 of the Constitution says, the President may, whenever he or she deems it advisable, issue a commission appointing one or more commissioners and authorizing such commissioners to inquire into. And that's it, issue a commission. So the commission that he issues, it's a tool, it's a mechanism, as opposed to an act which says the President may establish a commission, and then the act would then define the structure of the commission, whether the commission would have a board, whether the commission would have an executive director, whether the commission would have staff, would have accounting powers, and so on. That's an establishment. But here it just says the President may issue a commission. And how does he issue it? By legal notice, by appointing a number of people. Normally it's, I think, a minimum of 3. What does it say? To conduct, to inquire into the conduct of any public officer, and the terms are set out. And even the National Assembly may request the President to establish a commission of inquiry for any of the purposes set out. So then you look at the 201, the commission, how is it organized? It should have a presiding commissioner who should be chairperson.
Ms. Bensouda, that's important.
Yes.
In the grand scheme of your attempt to distinguish between the two, a key component is structure.
Yes.
But 201 is imputing structure. Wouldn't you agree?
So hold on one moment. I'm just trying to see whether there is any difference. Okay, it just says presiding commissioner. There are 3 commissioners, and they're equal. They're equal in every way. But Section 2.1 says there should be a presiding commissioner, but it doesn't put it even in those terms. It's just a person shall not be appointed a sole commissioner or the chairperson of a commission of inquiry unless he or she has been adjourned, and that's what he's talking about. And 2, where a commission of inquiry consists of more than 2 members, at least one commissioner shall be a person who has special qualifications or knowledge in the field of the investigations. And that's about it, as far as the function is concerned. So the president issues a commission. It
Can
be-
we stay on that point,
Yes,
Ms.
yes,
Bensouda?
yes.
201.
201, yes.
Again, I see that 201 attempts to impute structure within the commissioners. Not quite the commission, but the commissioners. Since there were three, let's focus on the three. 2011 specifies, and before I even go to 2011, if once you read the marginal, or rather the header note of 201, it provides for the presiding commissioner. Wouldn't you say that alone imputes authority? That, and sorry, rather not authority, but hierarchy, that there should be one amongst the commissioners who is not equal. And nowhere in 201 does it impute commissioners being equal, in my view. And I just wish to know from your wisdom what you're reading in 201 to impute that all the commissioners were equal.
There's nothing, legislation must be interpreted in a way that does not really make presumptions. The legislation is clear. It authorizes the president to issue a commission, not to appoint a commission, to issue a commission. And when he issues it, that commission, it's a tool, it's not an office. So there's nothing in the Constitution which says like when you have a group of persons.
May I just interrupt a little while? You know, technically today we are very constrained. We are only three on the panel. So if one steps down,
yes,
we'll hold down. So now nature calls. So we will stand down for 5 minutes or less. Less than that.
Okay, Honorable Chair. Most obliged. Are we off air?